We dive into final projections for the Baltimore Ravens 53-man roster in 2022, talk about the preseason, Lamar Jackson, and more, all coming up here next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day here and tuning in. We're free and available on all platforms. That includes over on YouTube in video form. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they can score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive an 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com. Promo code Locked On. And we're back here on a Tuesday episode of Taco Tuesday. And do we have a lot to dive into today? Final rosters due today at 4 p.m. Eastern. We're going to dive into roster projections. We'll talk about Lamar Jackson, the preseason. Here to do that with me, Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown. Spencer, long time no see here. If you missed it, I went on Spencer and Jake's show, the Baltimore Beatdown podcast. We chopped it up over there. Be sure to check that out, Spencer. We have a lot to dive into, even just 24 hours after that.
So yeah, a lot has happened since you came on last night. The Ravens news cycle never ends ultimately here. So Lamar Jackson is sending the Ravens Twitter into a little bit of a downward spiral, liking some things. Ronnie Stanley doesn't show up to it. Well, can't practice yet today. The Ravens say they have a plan for him. Cuts starting to happen and are going to continue here over the next 18 hours or so. So a lot going on in the football world, and we're here to chop it up.
Yeah, and let's start with the preseason. I just want to get your general thoughts overall. Baltimore does defeat Washington 17-15. They're never losing in the preseason again. I'm calling it now. They're going to continue this on and on and on. What were your overall takeaways from that game?
Takeaways from that game were that Josh Ross is making the 53-man roster. I think that Steven Means is a player that the Ravens probably are going to have to keep at this certain point in time, especially with Tyus Bowser on the PUP to start the season and missing the first 4 games. And that generally, we saw some flashes out of Anthony Brown, saw Demarcus Robinson make some fun plays, but I don't know that there are a ton of other takeaways. Tyler Linderbaum played about 9 snaps, exactly 9 snaps, and he played really well. So I think that we saw someone whose translated skill set from college to the NFL is going to be a lot of fun in the Ravens offense and being able to do some things that are unique to the center position. So not too many takeaways, It was a game where we end up seeing now Tony Jefferson gets cut and is let loose, maybe to come back on a handshake deal or maybe go find some work elsewhere potentially. But he was all over the field. I thought Armour-Davis Washington played a nice game. We saw some good things out of some DBs and things of that nature. But like you said, the Ravens in the preseason are the safest bet in all of sports. You take them money line and you don't lose money.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, with this team, just the depth they have built over the years is so incredible. And they're going to have some tough decisions to make here. We're going to dive into those decisions in the second and third segment. But Spencer, Lamar Jackson making some headlines, as he usually does, but doing it on Monday on the Twitter sphere. And talking a bit about his contract, now talking about $250 million guaranteed, and someone said, oh, well, the Ravens offered him that, and Lamar Jackson said, well, no, they didn't. So coming straight from the source there with Lamar Jackson. Then you have him liking a picture of himself in a Dolphins jersey. I mean, it's all over the place right now. Ravens fans, hopefully by the time this comes out, some stuff has calmed down a little bit, but it is pure mayhem right now on Twitter. I mean, what are your thoughts on this whole $250 million guaranteed and just Lamar Jackson's contract situation? Because that deadline, the self-imposed deadline, it seems, is coming up here in a couple weeks before the regular season starts.
Some sort of strange tweets going on, essentially, that definitely have thrown the Lamar fan base into a spiral. And Lamar responding that no, the Ravens did not ask for $250 million or a proposed $250 million fully guaranteed. He said that offer didn't happen, which wasn't really breaking news. We heard from Jay Glazer when the Ravens played the Cardinals that from his sources, and I think Jay's a pretty good insider ultimately, that doesn't miss terribly often when he firmly commits to something, did lay down a deal that would beat Kyler Murray's deal. Kyler Murray's deal does not come close to being $250 million fully guaranteed. Deshaun Watson, obviously the Browns trade for Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson gets a $230 million fully guaranteed contract, the really a pioneer contract in ways in NFL history. But ultimately an outlier, as Murray then immediately, a quarterback who doesn't have off the field issues in dozens and dozens and dozens, and the Cardinals didn't have to trade 3 first-round picks and 5 total picks to acquire him, ends up getting $160 million total guarantees, which is $70 million less than Watson's total guarantees. Again, $70 million less, and Murray is second in that figure, then fully guaranteed, which means if this deal is the absolute minimum, something happens, the Cardinals part ways with Kyler Murray as soon as possible, Murray has $103 million fully guaranteed. That is $127 million less than Deshaun Watson, who then, to even further blow your mind, hits free agency 2 years before Kyler Murray does. So Watson will be a free agent again for 2 years and get $70 million more in total guaranteed money, which really is the practical guaranteed money. Spot Track does practical guaranteed money, including, roster bonuses, showing up to camp bonuses, all those kinds of things. It's about 169. So let's call it even 169. Still, it's over $60 million less than Watson, and Murray's not going to hit free agency for 2 extra years. So Deshaun Watson's contract was bad business by the Browns, and it was bad moral and ethical business. It was also bad financially. They traded 3 first-round picks for a player who is suspended for 11 games, hasn't played football in 2 years, and gave him by far the largest deal, really, in terms of guaranteed money ever in NFL history. So, if there was no salary cap, and of course there are ways to get around the salary cap, and the salary cap is a myth. Well, yeah, sure. It helps when you're the Rams owner and you're worth $10 billion and you can, get rid of a Todd Gurley and get rid of a Jared Goff and just eat their contracts and then go acquire guys like Jalen Ramsey and Matt Stafford and, all these other Odell Beckham, all these other players, Von Miller. I mean, sure, there are ways around it. The Ravens could pony up more cash to do some interesting things, but Murray's deal, it's tough to say Lamar, that's not where the market is. The Cardinals just directly showed you they weren't going to push for a player that didn't have all of that drama associated, and they didn't have to, lose leverage in terms of picks and acquiring to pay Murray that. And hey, if you're of the tribe of thinking Lamar Jackson's a better player, absolutely. If you think he's worth more than Kyler Murray, absolutely. But to desire for a player on the team that you root for to go get, $250 million fully guaranteed, it's a lot. The Bisciotti would have to put, I think, like $190 million into escrow, meaning that cash has to get put into an account that he cannot touch by March if he were to sign Lamar Jackson to that contract. So that is a pretty penny. People are pointing fingers at Eric DeCosta now, and why isn't this getting done, and this and that. And hey, I'm not here to police people how to fan, but it's hard to think that the buck stops at Eric DeCosta when you're talking about someone paying that much cash. Steve Bisciotti is the owner of the team. He's the one cutting the check. I think that he's involved. They go to Jupiter, Florida. They, meaning John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta and Ozzie Newsome and the Sashi Brown and the brain trust of the Ravens and have these discussions. So ultimately, it is Steve Bisciotti's decision. And at this point, it's tough to say what's going to happen. It felt like there was a good flow going on through camp, and then whatever happened could just be a little tactic by Lamar, or maybe he is upset or frustrated, or maybe he is just, messing around on Twitter. Who knows? I can't tell you what he's doing. I do not know, but I know that Deshaun Watson's contract is $20 million less than that and puts him back into free agency in 2027. That was bad business for the Cleveland Browns. They lose 3 picks additionally, and that's not what you should be shooting after as a franchise. You don't want to beat that contract. But at the same time, Lamar definitely deserves more than Kyler Murray, and he'll get that. Whether it's in Baltimore or whether it's somewhere else, he will get more than Kyler Murray. Guys like Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert coming up here as well. The Ravens do still have 2 years of franchise tag ability for Jackson too. So I don't know. It's hard to get a read. The Ravens and Jackson have both been very tight-lipped, which is awesome. If it results in a positive thing for Ravens fans, if it does not, then it's going to be a lot more of an explosion of outcry, it feels like, from a fan base that will feel blindsided in many ways. So a lot going on, a lot to unpack, and a lot that we still don't know. But at the end of the day, Deshaun Watson's contract is truly ridiculous and not something that the Ravens should be striving to beat.
And I think when Kyler Murray was, lining up to sign that extension, there were a lot of people who were wondering if the Deshaun Watson contract was going to set a precedent in terms of fully guaranteed quarterback money. And it did not, as we saw. And for Lamar Jackson, I mean, look, he's going to earn every penny of what he gets on that deal, whatever it is. I do also think he'll get more than Kyler Murray. I think he deserves more than Kyler Murray, but there's so much other stuff that does go into the situation. And again, that the deadline is creeping up very quickly. I mean, 2 weeks, and I agree with the deadline. I don't think a contract should be negotiated in the middle of the year, especially one of this kind. I mean, it provides so many other things. So there's a lot to talk about, definitely there for sure. But Spencer, we also have talked about the Ravens outside linebacker depth quite a bit. And the fact that, they might not be as set there as they are to the positions. Now, these teams, as the rosters get cut down, they're going to be releasing some talent. And the Cardinals, one of those teams who released Devon Kennard, someone who I know, Spencer, we talked about pretty extensively many shows ago. Is that someone you'd be interested in Baltimore bringing in?
I think that Devon Kennard is a nice veteran player that would come in and provide a stable presence, someone that I have watched a fair amount of, honestly. Did cover the Cardinals a couple years ago for Sports Info Solutions and watched him really blossom. Guy that's bounced around, but a professional pass rusher that can come in and move the needle just a tick. I think that it was a little surprising to see him released. Apparently the Cardinals wanted younger players to get more time, was the factory tweet that Ian Rappaport sent out. But Kennard ultimately is someone that I think would be a nice pass rusher to have if the Ravens are to be without Houston or Owe. At any point in the first, month or 2 months of the season, they're going to be in a really bad place. So I think that bringing in Kennard would be a really nice safety net for them.
Yeah, I think so too. And with Baltimore having to kind of looking to do some roster gymnastics, it seems like maybe Kennard's a player they bring in after the 53-man rosters are set. And coming up, we're going to be diving into our 53-man projection show with Spencer. We're going to be diving into each position on the offensive side of the ball first. So be sure to stay tuned. We do also have a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about PrizePicks. And fantasy's been in my life for really as long as I can remember. We actually are doing the Locked On Ravens Fantasy Leagues again, so that'll be really, really fun. But for PrizePicks, it's actually really easy to use, and how it works is you pick 2 to 5 players, and if they will score more or less in their PrizePicks projection, and if they do, you come in up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus projections available. And PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch, and that includes the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball, and much more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's really that easy. You have safe and fast withdrawals, currently operational over 30 states and Canada as well. So download the PrizePicks app or go to the prizepicks.com website to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. So if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. We're back here with our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still hanging out with Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown. And thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day once again. But Spencer, let's get into this show here. We're going to do the offense first, talking about 53-man roster projections, talking about a team that, again, has so much talent and at the quarterback position. That's one of them. And Anthony Brown showed out in the preseason, really showed that he deserves to at least be on the Ravens practice squad. And that's where I have him right now. Right now, for me at least, I have 2 quarterbacks on the roster. That's Lamar Jackson and Tyler Huntley, with Anthony Brown not making the cut. Did you feel that same way?
Yeah, most certainly. I think that Tyler Huntley has cemented himself into a good spot. Anthony Brown is in a nice little quarterback factory, I think. The Ravens have become a low-key quarterback factory where they've had quite a few guys like Tyrod Taylor and some other passers that have ultimately developed into NFL passers, I'll say, as opposed to maybe starting quarterbacks around the league. But I think that the Ravens roll with Huntley and Jackson and try to tuck Anthony Brown on the practice squad. And if not, then they'll look elsewhere to find another mobile quarterback that is able to play within the rhythm of the offense and push the ball a little bit. But Anthony Brown has done a really nice job. And I think if you are to get a really nice deal for Tyler Huntley, Anthony Brown doesn't make you feel terrible, as he has proven as Huntley is. No, not at all. But I think that watching him develop and watching him be able to go play and put some definite highlight tape out pretty quickly, the Ravens put themselves in a nice position.
Yeah, I think so too. And you're hoping Anthony Brown makes it over to the practice squad for sure. But running back wise, Spencer, we know Gus Edwards on the reserve PUP list. J.K. Dobbins, who knows if he'll be ready for week 1, but he will be on the roster after coming off the PUP list. But I have them keeping 4 running backs right now in Dobbins, Mike Davis, Tyler Beatty, and also Justice Hill. I have Nate McCurry on the outside looking in right now. How's your running back room looking?
I've got the exact same, actually. I'm going to throw Pat Ricard in there. They do classify him as a running back, but ultimately he finds himself in the tight end room, running back room, wherever you are. But would think that they need Justice Hill and Beatty and Davis while they're working their way back from J.K. Dobbins' injury and Gus Edwards coming off of the PUP list ultimately later in the season. you need more fresh legs. And by then, someone will probably be nicked up when it's time for Gus Edwards to return.
Right. And I think obviously the fullback situation pretty squared away with Ricard there, so we don't have to really talk about that one. But wide receiver wise, Spencer, the addition of Demarcus Robinson kind of complicated some things for some of these younger players like Shamar Bridges, Mekhi Polk, Riley Webb, who, showed some flashes throughout the preseason. I still have them keeping 5 guys. It's the big fours they've been classified as, and Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tylan Wallace, Demarcus Robinson there was 5. And then for guys like Shamar Bridges and all those, I think they're practice squad candidates.
Definitely. I think that they're going to roll with 5 to start. I think Robinson, Bateman, Wallace, Duvernay, and Prochet are going to be the crew there. They already have snuck guys like Benjamin Victor through the practice squad before. And having guys like Riley Webb, having guys like Shamar Bridges, all of them as well, I think gives them confidence that they will be able to be a little lighter in other positions like offensive line, cornerback, to be able to try and sneak those guys to the practice squad where, again, they've had the ability to do it. And, hey, maybe we see them claim someone that is released at some point. Some teams are a little bit different in terms of the Ravens and do have a plethora of receivers.
Yeah, and I think when looking at what the Ravens have at wide receiver now, I think they have a very good complement. Like, obviously, with the Demarcus Robinson signing, not necessarily a super needle mover to us like, oh, the Ravens are winning the Super Bowl because they have Demarcus Robinson, but he can come in and play a role, and that's what they needed. They didn't need a number 1 wideout to be a Demarcus Robinson. They didn't need him to come in and do that. I think he showed his role and did it against double move, still one of the more beautiful double moves I've seen in a little while. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the table against first stringers, who he has done it against in Kansas City. But tight end wise, Spencer, this is an interesting position that the Ravens are in right now because Charlie Kolar feels like an IR guy, but he has to be on the 53-man roster before going on IR to actually have a chance to play this season. So obviously the 3 that are locks, well, actually Kolar's a lock too, but you have Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Nick Boyle, and Kolar. But I don't have them keeping 5 in Josh Oliver. I still have them keeping 4 and then moving Kolar to IR and then maybe seeing what's out there. Do you have them keeping 5 right now, or are you still there at 4?
I think that the Ravens are going to roll with 4 there. I think Oliver, they'll try and tuck on the practice squad and definitely might be able to pick up somewhere else. I think he's a nice kind of backup rotational tight end that could go give you 5-10 snaps a game if you need. So I think that Oliver maybe finds another opportunity. The Ravens cut their losses there and go with 4.
Yeah, and follow up, do you feel like tight end is the strongest position on the roster right now?
It's hard not to. When you have a first-team All-Pro that was nearly unanimous, got 43 out of 50 votes, you see Likely making noise. You have Nick Boyle who can do various things for you, Pat Ricard in that hybrid role, and having a guy that doesn't have any pressure on him, that is hurt, is injured, is going to be a little bit behind the 8 ball, but can develop quietly and probably won't need to be relied on a ton, especially if the Ravens are able to keep any modicum of health in that room. So just about the strongest room in Baltimore.
Yeah, there are a couple others we'll talk about in that final segment. I think safety, defensive line also and put their names in the hat for that one. But offensive line, Spencer, this one was a difficult one for me because I anticipated a trade of Ben Powers. I'm actually pretty shocked he's still on the roster, but Baltimore rests him. That's a pretty good indication for him, at least, that he's won that left guard job, which was, it was interesting, I'd say, how that went throughout the offseason. But I have 10 guys. I was trying to fit 11 on there. I just couldn't do it. I have Ronnie Stanley on there, Ben Powers, Tyler Linderbaum, Kevin Zeitler, Morgan Moses, Tyree Phillips, Ben Cleveland, Patrick McCary, Juan James, and Daniel Falele. So the one notable omission there is Tristan Colon, who I think is a very viable backup center in this league and will probably be scooped up pretty quickly if he doesn't make the roster.
Yeah, I think that that's a pretty solid list. I feel like, it's tough with McCary and Colon and Cleveland and Phillips and Powers and all of those guys. So I think the Ravens ultimately deal one of those players. And when I say those players, I mean between Powers, Phillips, and Cleveland. I don't think you have room for 3 guys that really kind of have to play guard. They do run Phillips at tackle, but they shouldn't be. So I think the Ravens might try and flip Phillips somewhere or flip Powers somewhere. So I think they do roll with McCary. I don't think they're ready to quite cut ties with Cleveland yet, but wouldn't be surprised by that at the same time. So I do think that one moves on. So I've got Ronnie Stanley, Juwan James, 2 of those 3, let's call it. I'm going to go with Ben Powers, Tyree Phillips, I'm going to go with Ben Powers and Ben Cleveland. Then we're going to go with Tyler Linderbaum, Patrick McCary, Morgan Moses, Daniel Falele. And I think Tristan Colon makes this team. Wouldn't be surprised to see it go the other way and him sneak onto the practice squad. But I think, again, one of those guards gets moved.
Yeah, if one of them does, that puts Colon on my roster, definitely. I mean, going off what they have right now, do you feel confident if Ben Powers is the guy there to start at left guard? Is he a guy that you'd feel confident trotting out there week 1 at that position?
Yeah, Ben Powers is a fine player. Athletically, has his limitations. Stiff guy, can lose some reps pretty cleanly, but very solid run blocker. He's fine. I don't think he's ever going to be a world beater. I don't think he's a huge liability at the same time. I think you're getting an average level of left guard play out of him. So if that's who they roll with, they're okay. The starting five, I don't think is bad. We'll see what Linderbaum's kind of rookie learning curve is and how much of one there is. We really only got those 9 snaps in that preseason game. So definitely a little bit limited in that sense. But with Stanley, hopefully, Juan James maybe having to play week 1, I think you're okay. Juan James obviously not preferred, but has looked admirable in the preseason and is kind of trying to play to revitalize his career right now, get healthy, make a little bit more money, and turn these things into positives for him as maybe he continues in Baltimore or elsewhere. So offensive line, not in a great place, but not in a terrible place the way they were last year after week 1.
Yeah, I think, again, it all really does hinge on Ronnie Stanley, just the player that he is when he's fully healthy. And again, we don't really know what that player is after the injury. What's the mobility like with his ankle? Is he able to move the way he used to? But one of the better run protectors and pass protectors in this league when you're talking about offensive line, one of the best tackles to do it in the business. But Spencer, when you look at the offense as a whole, do you feel like, as we talked about these teams getting rid of some players themselves, every team is in the position that the Ravens are in right now, trying to fit guys on their roster, talent and everything. Do you feel like Baltimore could look to add anywhere else after this is over? Maybe an outside addition in that tight end room if they have to put Kohler and IR and want a 4th tight end, but Oliver doesn't stay. Maybe a running back addition, Kenyon Drake out there. Anybody there?
Yeah, Kenyon Drake's a good one to bring up. There probably are going to be some running backs they're interested in. I don't know how much they're in love with, Beatty and Davis and Hill ultimately. I think they'll probably give Beatty his shot. They tend to not part ways with draft picks, but running back, receiver, perhaps a tackle. Tackle is pretty scarce typically. I think they kind of want to just roll with what they have there, as opposed to trying to acquire someone, that's in that 3rd, 4th tier of player in that position, especially after waves and cuts and everything like that. So I would look at receiver and I would look at running back as areas where they definitely still are going to try to poach from other teams or get a bargain in.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And we'll talk more about handshake deals in the final segment coming up. We will be diving into the final part of our show here, talking about the defensive roster projections for Baltimore. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. But first, I have a very important message. Are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to drive under the influence? What's the worst that can happen? You end up driving below the speed limit in some circumstances. It's no big deal, right? Wrong. The truth is your reaction time slows way down when you're under the influence in some instances. Not only put yourself in danger, but everyone around you. Talk about a buzzkill. Stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive under the influence. If you've been under the influence in any form, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different, drive under the influence, or get a DUI. We're back here with our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Spencer Schultz. And Spencer, the defense for the Ravens has a ton of talent everywhere, and they're going to have to probably part with 1 or 2 very talented players overall. Now, on the defensive line, and honestly, throughout the whole defense, there are situations with either injured reserve potential candidates and handshake deal candidates. The defensive line, I think, has both of those, with Brent Urban, who I have as a handshake guy right now, and Travis Jones, whose situation is a little bit murky in terms of the injury. Could the Ravens put him on IR? Could they not? So right now, I have the Ravens keeping 6 defensive linemen, with Brent Urban being that handshake guy. And I have Calais Campbell, Michael Pierce, Justin Madubuike, Broderick Washington, Travis Jones, and Isaiah Mack. He would get scooped up in a hurry if he was to not make this team. And I think for what he brings, and with the uncertainty of Travis Jones and the ability to still bring back Brent Urban, I think he's not a must on this roster, but he'd be a really good player to have.
Yeah, I think they might try and sneak him through the practice squad. They've had a little bit of success there. I think Rashad Nichols as well is another one they might look at in that practice squad ultimately. But when it's all said and done, I think the Ravens keep 5. I think they roll with Madubuike, Pierce, Campbell, Broderick Washington, and 6, Brent Urban and Travis Jones. With Travis Jones, obviously kind of a similar situation to Kohler, where we'll see when he's going to be ready. I don't think he's supposed to be out quite as long as Kohler, but that would be the 6 for me. Aaron Crawford, I did think had a good shot to push on this team, but now with him suffering what Harbaugh described as, not a light injury, that's a little bit of a different situation, and they're going to end up having 6.
Yeah, I'm there with you with the 6 now. Whether Urban makes it or whether Mac makes it, I think either way, Urban's going to be on the team. It's just a matter of whether they decide to let him go, bring him back, or whatnot in that area. But outside linebacker, Spencer, we did talk about that a bit in the first segment with Devon Kennard. But there's a little thing with David Ajabo's contract and just when it was signed, where he's not eligible for the NFL list anymore. So he has to be on the 53-man and then has to move over to IR. So that's a roster spot they have to use. But right now, I do have them keeping 4, and Odafe Owe, Justin Houston, Dalen Hayes, and David Ajabo, with Steven Means being another handshake guy.
Yeah, it's an interesting group with Ajabo. It does create a little bit of a difficult situation. I think they ultimately go with Dalen Hayes, Odafe Owe, Justin Houston, Steven Means, and then, like you said, Ajabo. So that leaves, a guy like Jeremiah Moon or perhaps a guy like Kennard to come in a little bit. So a tough decision for the Ravens in that sense. And Means is the veteran, so I think they edge it out with him unless they bring someone else in.
Yeah, and speaking of that depth, Spencer, on the outside with the outside linebackers, is that now the number one need for you for this team heading into the season?
It definitely feels like it is, and considering, that luckily Justin Houston has been a durable player for them, but we'll knock on wood for him. But, relying on him to take really heavy snaps is not a good idea at this point in his career. You want to be trying to maximize his output by putting him in high leverage downs more so. And the way things currently are, you can't really do that. So Malik Harrison, a guy that definitely can factor into that room and give you some snaps in what the Ravens call their Raven package, which is their base defense. But at this point, they are definitely on the prowl and going to be without a player that they extended, and we're really hoping to be a significant piece for them in Tyus Bowser. So they're definitely behind the 8 ball in the edge room, I think, more than anywhere else.
Yeah, Bowser, you could definitely argue, was Baltimore's most consistent defender in 2021, just the way that he played overall. And I think for what Baltimore has there, they could definitely look to bring somebody in, definitely. In inside linebacker, Spencer, is a position where the use of the position now for Baltimore is a little bit interesting because they can bring safeties up in the box. They don't necessarily have to have 2 inside linebackers on the field on every single play. So right now, I have 3 inside linebackers making this team, and Patrick Queen, Malik Harrison, and Josh Ross, with Bynes again being one of those handshake players and bring him back. So it ultimately would be 4, but right now, I think Josh Ross and Christian Welch are kind of battling it out for that last spot, but I'm going to give it to Ross.
I'm going to give it to Ross as well. I think that they definitely could have that handshake. I'm going to copy you in lockstep of that. That Bynes obviously probably doesn't want to go anywhere else. I think they do want Bynes, but because of a situation like Ajabo and Kohler, the Ravens are going to need those handshake deals. Perhaps they have that with Tony Jefferson. Perhaps they have that with Bynes, but I'm also going to give the edge to Josh Ross here. Although we didn't see Ross really outplay Welch in terms of when he was getting on the field. Welch was with the second group, and Ross was consistent with the third group. We did see them play together. I don't know how much that factors in. That could maybe be a little bit of an indicator, but I would not want to leave Josh Ross on the waiver wire if I were the Baltimore Ravens. I would be much happier to lose Christian Welch than I would to lose Josh Ross at this point.
Yeah, I think either one doesn't make it through to the practice squad. I think both those guys probably get picked up. So I agree. I think at this point, I would rather have Josh Ross, even though Christian Welch has been a pretty consistent contributor on special teams for them over the past couple of seasons. But cornerback-wise, Spencer, and again, the secondary, it kind of depends where you classify guys at. But I have 6 cornerbacks making this team: Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Kyle Fuller, Brandon Stevens, Jalen Armour-Davis, and Pepe Williams. Any surprises or any differences there for you?
Nope, I'm in lockstep with you there as well. I think it's the group is pretty defined at that point. Daryl Worley did not quite look the part. I don't know what's going to happen with some of these cornerback room things and some of this backroom stuff, but ultimately I'm right there with you.
Yeah, and safety-wise, again, does depend how you classify the Ravens. Again, the news breaking yesterday that the Ravens are planning to release Tony Jefferson. And so safety-wise, I had this before the news, but Marcus Williams, Chuck Clark, Kyle Hamilton, Geno Stone, and Ardarius Washington, with, again, I think Jefferson being a pretty good candidate for the handshake deal. What do you have in your safety room?
I've got Marcus Williams, I've got Kyle Hamilton, Geno Stone, and Chuck Clark as well. I'm curious to see what plays out with Clark and if he is on the field for the Ravens week 1 or if maybe there's a little bit of a different arrangement. But with that being said, I think we're on the same page there as well.
Yeah, and is Washington there too, or is he someone who just missed it for you?
He's someone who just missed it for me.
Do you think he would make it through to the practice squad, or do you think someone scoops him up?
Coming off the injury, I'm not quite sure. I think he can make it through to the practice squad. He did go undrafted with a lot of buzz. The size apparently was too big of a deal for many teams. So I think the Ravens have a good shot to stash him. They did it last year, so I'm more than willing to bet on that being the case again. I think it's a little bit tough to find certain spots for him as a safety. He's built more of like that nickel slot only kind of defender, but does rotate back into some safety looks. So I think the Ravens have a good shot to sneak him through to the practice squad.
Yeah, and let's talk about the practice squad here because what would your ideal, a couple of players from the roster who would be ideal players who are on the practice squad? I know we talked a bit about Anthony Brown and maybe Shamar Bridges, but who would some ideal players for that squad be?
Definitely Shamar Bridges, definitely Benjamin Victor, definitely Riley Webb. Like I said, maybe one of those linebackers, Christian Welch, they were able to sneak through last year. That's someone that I'm looking towards. Would love to see Isaiah Mack snuck through there. Would love to see Rashad Nichols snuck through there, very much so. Kayvon Seymour, someone that the Ravens are decently high on, potentially there as well. Ben Mason feels like he's happy where he is, and he's going to stick there and probably hang out there. I think David Sharp is another one, as in the deep tackle room that the Ravens have, that they're going to be looking to try and drag through. Someone that's shown some athletic ability, gotten to be able to compete in some games, and has a nice little pass set that's maybe not, going to find him a starting job anywhere soon, but I think they would be very happy to have him as a reserve depth option.
And part of the reason why Baltimore's practice squad, I think, can be so strong this year is because of how much depth they have, and the fact that they're going to, if everything goes well for them and they're able to sneak everybody they want to on the practice squad, and maybe a couple of outside additions too. We've seen that also over the past couple of seasons. I think that if guys go down, and it's football, so guys will go down, unfortunately. If the Ravens need somebody to come up and make a spot start here, or come up and play special teams there, I think it will be okay for them, and they'll be able to get contributions from a lot of different guys overall. But rosters, again, finalized 4 p.m. Eastern time today. We'll see how right or wrong we were coming up here in really, for when this comes out, just a couple of hours. But Spencer, I appreciate you hopping on. Thanks so much for joining me here. What do you have going on over at Baltimore Beatdown?
Just be continuing to crank out some episodes. Baltimore Beatdown podcast. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts. We'll be going through the 53-man roster, going through all that good stuff, trying to get some record predictions in. We will have a very, 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 very special guest, someone from the state of Louisiana, joining our podcast on Friday afternoon, tentatively as well. So look out for that episode, and then just continuing to break down tape once the season starts and getting ready to roll with any other roster moves the Ravens make. So just content, getting geared up for the season. Very excited.
Yeah, it's great. We're finally so close to regular season football. We got the taste of the preseason. We're ready for real football to come, and we're definitely here. So be sure to, again, check out Spencer. Follow him on Twitter at Ravens4Dummies. His links will be in the description below on YouTube. And be sure to subscribe to this channel and like this video as well. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into the Ravens 53-man roster and breaking it down. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.